Startup football leagues never seem to go away. Throughout the game's history, we have seen different leagues come and go.
And welcome to the new game in town, the World Football League.
Some have made quite a name for themselves and have found success, while others were a complete disaster.
This is the XFL!
For today's video, I'm accompanied by fellow YouTuber Set the Edge. Set the Edge makes some of the best football content on YouTube. If you like football history and in-depth analysis of the game, he's your guy. Check him out when you get the chance. We will be ranking leagues based on their overall success on a tier list. He and I will take different tiers and discuss them accordingly. Set the Edge will start us off with F tier. And before we dive in, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Personally, I've come to love how convenient their wireless earbuds are just in everyday life. I will work out with them and do things like yard work, and they have been such a pleasure to use. What's great is they start at half the price of other premium wireless earbuds on the market, and they sound just as good. Their latest model is their best one yet. It has 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, more bass, and a compact design that provides great noise cancellation. An added bonus is they come in a variety of colors to help you find your perfect fit. The company was co-founded by Ray J, and you see celebrities like Snoop Dogg and J.R. Smith rocking these. Click the link in the description below to get 15% off your order. Shout out to Raycon for the sponsor. Now let's dive into the video.
When it comes to the everlasting pursuit of starting a football league that can make money outside of the grasp of the NFL, every single overambitious new CEO thinks they are going to finally be the ones to get things right. Kinda like a girl who refuses to leave her terrible boyfriend named Kyle because she knows in her heart that she's still able to change him. But just like trying to get Kyle to apply to Arby's, time and time again these unsinkable ventures get absolutely nowhere close to the mark. The leagues that are found down here are the complete bottom of the barrel. Operations that lasted only a matter of years, complete with fatal flaws and a stunning overestimation of their own abilities. Like, for instance, the World Football League of 1974. Their major selling point was that they were going to bring football to a worldwide stage, but that's not all they brought to the table. They offered up ideas like color-coded pants by position, and this thing, a device called the Dickerod, which was intended to replace chain crews with just one guy and one device. The league did draw in some massive crowds early on, probably a bunch of people that wanted to see the Dickerod live in action, but like a lot of elements within the WFL, that interest turned out to be a total hoax. In reality, teams lied about their ticket sales and funneled thousands of people into their stadiums for free, completely ruining their credibility from the outset. Not to mention, multiple teams had not even close to paid the mandatory franchise fee in full, leaving them without many of the necessary resources to even keep players fed, healthy, and paid not just on time, but paid at all. It was terrible management. One team, the Detroit Wheels, regularly had to cancel their practices because the team could no longer afford to have their jerseys cleaned. It became resoundingly clear the WFL was just not ready to handle the worldwide stage it set for itself. And as the overall financial losses scaled into the millions for every team involved, the league would fold after a brutal season-and-a-half stretch. F tier. Our next journey into total collapse brings us to Vince McMahon's original version of the XFL back in 2001, a league that attempted to steal the spotlight of the NFL by transitioning directly into their season following the Super Bowl, with a tougher style of play complete with bone-crushing hits, replacing coin tosses with straight 1v1s at midfield, and most of all, absolutely no fair catches.
No fair catches. The XFL.
Vince McMahon's signature cockiness and prioritization of advertising and hype ultimately defined what the league brought to the table, a lot of flash and very little substance behind it. There were some interesting ideas at play for sure, like the implementation of the Sky Cam, allowing players to choose nicknames for the back of their jerseys, revolutionizing on-field access by placing mics on everyone and their mother. It really provided a lens into what football entertainment could look like. But the operative word in all of this is still football, and that's exactly where the XFL fell flat on its face. The league's teams were only given 30 days to take themselves from guys off the street to professional football players, and that translated pretty poorly to say the least. Once fans immediately realized they were watching bad football players rather than superhumans who could take a round from a tank to the chest, viewership plummeted to lows that they were just never able to recover from. It was clear the XFL was in over its head, and that one season was more than enough of an embarrassment to warrant never looking at it again. That is, until, we'll get to that later. But as far as the 2001 XFL is concerned, they get an F for
the XFL is going to be the extra fun league.
Now let's talk about 2009 to 2012's United Football League, an operation that entered the sports world with a whisper and left it with an even softer whisper. In fact, I'm confident the majority of you have not even heard of them. Without a doubt, the main reason for that has to do with their decision to play football in the main fall season, placing them in direct competition with some pretty popular kids. Their idea was that rather than being a direct competitor to the NFL, the UFL would give pro-ready players the opportunity to be conditioned and in playing shape for the final stretch of the NFL season, wrapping up theirs in November and giving players a chance to join a battered roster that's in need of some help. However, while this provided opportunities for a number of NFL hopefuls, that was about the only thing it had going for it from the start. The whole league suffered from a lack of exposure to the public and a general disinterest in trying to stand out from the crowd in any way, and to reiterate, they were playing in the fall. It didn't take long to realize the UFL's model was intriguing, but ultimately a losing bet, and they ceased operation after 3.5 seasons. So the UFL gets an F for good old fall football. Moving on now to the Alliance of American Football, the most recent of any defunct league on this list, and it might just be the saddest case of a league self-destructing that I have ever heard. In 2018, Charlie Ebersol and Bill Polian founded the AAF as a spring developmental style league that made its objective to one day work alongside the NFL rather than against it. However, things tend to go a bit awry when your main investor goes to prison and now you can't pay anybody, and desperate times are often met with desperate measures. In the case of the AAF, that meant selling the farm to Tom Dundon, owner of the Carolina Hurricanes, who made it very quickly known that his vision for the league was to get support from the NFL immediately to keep it alive. So when the NFL came back and said, no dude, you gotta get your own players, Tom responded by shutting down the entire operation right smack in the middle of the league's very first season, losing hundreds of millions of dollars on his own investment, not to mention putting tons of players out on the street with no real reason given as to why. In the end, the AAF couldn't help but just place a sword on the ground and then fall on it, despite their best intentions. So for that, they get an F for financial collapse. So while startup leagues may come with their quirks that generate interest early on, it's been proven over and over again that if you don't have the necessary foundation, the cracks will show immediately. But sometimes it's a little more complicated than that. To elaborate, let me pass it back to KTO.
Moving past the bottom feeders, we move to D tier. This tier represents more success than the previous mentioned, but ultimately still failed. One league stands alone here, the USFL. The United States Football League had been a well-thought-out plan for nearly 2 decades before its existence. Instead of competing directly with the NFL during the fall, they introduced the idea of playing in the spring. Along with that, franchises were prepared to tank the financial losses during the early years. They had teams plan 1-year preseason promotional budgets to market the team, a proposed salary cap to control spending, and even credit lines to help keep the franchises afloat. They didn't change much about the game itself. If anything, it was more geared towards benefiting the offense. At first, the league seemed like it had a legitimate shot to make it.
One shot left. Last play of the ball game right here. Down the middle. Caught. A ricochet catch by Lockett for a touchdown.
The hype around the league was unreal, and this is how well the USFL started out. In 1983, the average attendance was roughly 25,000, which is about what they expected. Then in 1984, the league expanded, and unlike other startups, the average attendance actually went up. Keep in mind that the NFL was in a state of turmoil. In 1982, the players held a strike that lasted 8 weeks. Then in 1983, the ratings were declining. The USFL had proven itself enough that ABC offered them a 4-year, $150 million TV deal to play in the spring in 1986. There was even speculation that the offer went up to $175 million. It seemed like the league had made it. But here's where things went wrong.
The struggling United States Football League is resorting to what some are calling the long bomb in court. An antitrust suit against the National Football League. Nick Charles is here.
That's right.
All the details.
Don, the action is not on the field tonight. The lawsuit is large and lengthy, though. The USFL suing the NFL for a total of $1.32 billion.
The USFL's success was short-lived. First, it started with many of the teams going over the proposed cap to sign players. Team owners were desperate to compete, and it cost the franchises financially. This got out of control, and David Dixon, the founder of the USFL, was so upset that he was bought out. At this point, the league was bleeding money. Teams were going under, and the majority of the owners wanted to move the league to the fall to directly compete with the NFL or find a way to merge. That's when they went on to sue the NFL for antitrust laws. Long story short, the USFL lost. Instead of being awarded as much as $1.7 billion, they were given a laughable $3.76. For only lasting 3 seasons and ending $160 million in the hole, D tier is where they belong. Let's move on to C tier. This is where we start to see leagues last longer than a few seasons. Standing by itself in this category, we have NFL Europe. Well, it was originally known as the World League of American Football. It featured teams from the US, Canada, and Europe. Although the league did well in Europe, teams in the United States were barely noticed. Plus, you could imagine the logistical problem with traveling overseas for a lot of these games. The league was suspended after 2 seasons, but it made its comeback in 1995, this time around with only European teams. The World League of American Football would go on to serve as the NFL's developmental league for over a decade. It had been backed by NFL owners since the beginning. In 1998, they changed the name to NFL Europe.
Quinn now on the naked bootleg. Washington chases him, but Quinn unloads. And what a great catch and a touchdown! Dwayne Jones is second of the game.
To call NFL Europe a success would change depending on who you ask. On one hand, the league lasted 15 seasons. It gave a starting point to many future greats in the NFL like Kurt Warner, Dante Hall, and Adam Vinatieri. Some of the teams had very loyal fans like the London Monarchs and the Frankfurt Galaxy. We even saw a lot of these teams make an appearance in the old Maddens. Now we go to the other hand. The league was bleeding money. The games just didn't do very well on television. Many of the teams struggled to get much fan support, and this resulted in a revolving door of new teams and league realignments. In 2007, it was reported that the league was losing up to $30 million a year. That's when Roger Goodell said goodbye to NFL Europe. There was no denying that some of the teams really had a great fan base and were doing well. The only current compromise they have is a few NFL games played each season in London. Will we ever see an NFL team overseas? It seems unlikely. Who knows? But anyways, now we move on to the B tier. To make it this far and not be the NFL is quite remarkable. You have to find a way to be unique, and that's just what the Arena Football League did. Back in 1987, after witnessing an indoor soccer game years prior, Jim Foster founded the Arena Football League. It was constructed of a field roughly a quarter of the size of a regular football field. The sidelines were replaced with walls, and there were 8 players on the field per team instead of 11. This had turned the game into a fast-paced, action-packed fan favorite. The aesthetic of the game was so cool, it turned into multiple video games years later. With less players to pay, and a totally different vibe than the traditional game, Arena Football had found a formula for success. The league managed to last over 20 seasons, making it the 3rd longest running American football league in North America. They even reached a point where they had their own developmental league, the AF2. But here's the thing, I'm sure most of you watching have at least heard of or seen highlights of Arena Football. But how many of you have actually been to a game or watched a team closely? I put a card in the corner of this video so you could vote for these questions. Anyways, the truth is, the Arena Football League was a 20-year journey of suspended seasons, adding teams, subtracting teams, and never finding much more success than just getting by. They even had the original AF1 dissolve, which caused the AF2 to become the main league, and then legally changing its name to the AF1. With the constant rebranding of teams, some found a way to be successful, but for others, it just never caught on. The league ceased operations in 2019. Now, we have seen spin-off leagues make an appearance over the years, and currently, the Indoor Football League is still in operation after a decade of existence. They have had the best business model as they have had the same name and corporate structure longer than any current indoor football league. For this reason, they also belong in B tier. Now remember, all these tiers are relative. Here we are in B tier and we're still not even close to the NFL. Just to help me explain this, IFL players currently earn a minimum of $200 per game before taxes. NFL practice squad players make a minimum of $8,400 a week. The difference is substantial, but we have 2 more tiers.
In learning from the fallen leagues of the days of old, it's clear the market for football, while very broad, is a lot more slippery than it looks, and it's very easy for a league to overestimate its staying power just on the principle of how popular football is, even globally now. The game continues to expand to this day, with the NFL building interest in the UK and even an NFL rules professional league down in Mexico. Without a doubt though, the single best example of a football league finding success outside of the States is the Canadian Football League, which has now been in operation for over 60 years. The game resembles that of the NFL, but includes a wide variety of different rules that makes the CFL a unique game, such as allowing 12 players on the field at a time, 3 downs per possession as opposed to 4, running starts for wide receivers, etc., etc. But what the CFL has that so many leagues have tried and failed to achieve over the years is a defined market. They're outside of the NFL's domain, much smaller scale, and focused on being consistent and growing year over year. They're not perfect and have certainly had moments of doubt over the years, but they don't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So for their continued success story, they get to be the first league inducted into the A tier. But while the CFL has found its own bubble of success up in the Great White North, the American Football League of the 1960s is the only league to ever take on the NFL head-to-head and actually win, considering they're still a part of pro sports today. Founded in 1960, the AFL made it clear they were going to try and expand into areas the NFL was slow to, strategically placing franchises in cities like Oakland, Denver, Buffalo, Kansas City, and more. Possibly the biggest power move the AFL ever exhibited, though, was getting Broadway Joe Namath to sign in the AFL straight out of college to the richest contract in football history at the time. A statement that not only did the league want to have an audience for their football, it wanted to have the audience for football. The AFL and NFL went on to compete for players, influence, and increasingly worked harder to one-up and outspend the other to a point where a merger between the two leagues seemed like the most sensible step forward, just 6 years after the founding of the AFL in 1966. This holy matrimony brought us the first ever Super Bowl with the AFL against the NFL. Early on, younger AFL teams struggled against historic powerhouses like the Green Bay Packers, but it was the AFL poster boy Joe Namath's upset win in Super Bowl III that echoed the AFL could compete with the big boys, and to this day, the most recent Super Bowl winner is an original AFL franchise. So while they're no longer technically around today, they still get put in A tier for accomplishing what the USFL couldn't. Now we have reached the top of the mountain, a peak that, if we're being honest, is really about 30 tiers up into the stratosphere and in space rather than just a step up. I'm of course talking about the National Football League, an institution that has existed for over a century now and is not afraid of anything at this point, except for maybe marijuana. But to sum things up, here's a graph showing just how massive the NFL is, not just among football leagues, but to the point where you can fit the annual revenue of nearly every other major sport within it. Case closed, S tier.
Now, all we have left to discuss is the second rendition of the XFL. At the time this video is being published, the league is doing well. Week 3 is in the books, ratings are still solid, and attendance numbers are actually going up. And it seems like the league has fixed a lot of its core issues from the first time around. It has a better product on the field, while still keeping some of the more fun aspects of the game, like better kickoff rules and sideline interviews.
You're also the kicker. I know you haven't kicked in a meaningful game in about 2-3 years here. Just for you getting it back out there, you're going to get another chance. Oh, yeah. Sort of, what's your mentality going forward?
So far, the XFL is proving to be a great alternative to the NFL. For those of you paying attention to the league, what are your predictions for which tier this version of the XFL will end up in? At this point, no one knows. And it doesn't matter. Let's just enjoy it for what it is. Because football, especially when it's exciting, is a million times better than no football.
Can't move to the ball is fielded, and here goes Keith Mumphrey. And they're going to turn it around with room on the near side. And for the first time, they get creative. And the Battlehawks have the sideline. And a kickoff return for Joe Powell.